So I think it's an excellent time while I, a modern person, am using this cave for the same reasons that people used them way back in the early days, to acknowledge that there may be a time in the near future when the boat stops coming and the supplies run low, and even though you may be sitting in a nice condominium or suburban house, or a little ranch house someplace out on the side of the mountain, there could easily come a time when, because of social unrest, being too far from sources of food and water, that you actually have to leave your comfortable dwelling and go live someplace just like this, in a cave that's a lot closer to the things that you need to survive. So I like to look at these places as though they are my possible home, not just an archaeological site, to try to make it more present. At the risk of undervaluing the perspective of the people who actually lived in Hawaiian days in shelters like this, their perspective is probably incomprehensible to me, frankly. It all depends on what you're raised with, ultimately. And yet, I feel like at least I'm making an attempt to honor and respect that perspective when I come out into places like this. And just as I wouldn't appreciate it if someone came to my cabin and burst open the door and threw down their wet clothes on my bed and took a snooze, ate all my food and watched TV for a couple of days, there's a sense of personal space that can easily be violated, especially if that space is still being utilized. Now, a space like this, if it was ever utilized, maybe 200 years ago, it's really of no use to its original owners at this time. And yet, it's, I think, worthwhile to acknowledge that there may be still a connection to those people present here, without going into a philosophic, religious, or spiritual guessing game, to at least acknowledge that there is perhaps a connection to people now long dead in some of these places, and that when I come traipsing through here with my backpack and camera and attitude, howly perspective and all of that, that it's important to take a time and pause and ask permission and treat a space as though it were someone's home that you're just knocking on the door of and perhaps going into for shelter out of a true need, or even out of curiosity, but that in doing so you are circumspect enough that you will not disturb, rearrange, take, impose your identity upon. I don't think we need any graffiti artists out here for any reason. So that's what I try to do, and that's what I encourage other people to do if they're going to come hiking with me, at least, is to show some respect for all spaces, but specifically the ones that perhaps other humans have lived in and have still a connection to. But truly all spaces have their hard to put into words, have their essence that also deserves respect. Perhaps the easiest way to justify that respect is to note that in giving respect to a person or an animal or a place, that act of humility that we experience is actually in itself a blessing upon the one who's giving it. There's nothing sweeter than humility. There's nothing more endearing about a person than their ability to be humble. That's what invites someone who doesn't know you to want to know you more, that they sense in a welcome humility in your presence. And that's why I think it's beneficial, regardless of your philosophical stance, to practice asking permission when you come into a space, because it does you so much good to be humble. And if by chance there were any entity in that space, that humility would make you appear much more charming, and perhaps to your benefit. So I think it's good advice, and that's the way we do it around here. I think we've all seen images in clouds, projected ideas, recognized shapes in clouds, and also in rocks, and especially in the high mountain areas when the air gets thin and there's nothing out there that a human ever oriented. The ability of people to see shapes and figures and faces in the rocks becomes magnified. And in light of that, I think it's worth noting that even though we know that a rock is an inanimate object as compared to a human who is an animated, living thing, our mere ability to project life onto a rock, whether it's in the form of just seeing a face in it, or as a sculptor to carve it into something recognizable, that demonstrates a kinship that we feel with the material, with the rock itself, and that should be noted, that we are not so separate from these inanimate objects that we can't relate to them. And it does not have to be a one-way street where we project our ideas onto the rocks. It's equally possible for us to be silent and humble and inviting enough that the rocks project something upon us. That kind of inquiry is a wonderful relief from the superficial crap that you're likely to see on TV most of the time. To ponder for a while, to turn the TV off and ponder for a while what a rock might project upon you, what you might learn from a rock by its interaction with you. You could easily spend a few hours on that one, and I would highly recommend going down to your favorite beach and just spending some time in the presence of rocks and listening to what they have to say. And the same thing can be done in a cave or anywhere. I think that's enough of Savory's personal philosophy. You're on your own now. Thank you for coming with me on this little walk, and I hope that we can do some more adventures in the near future. Yeah. So, here we are. Do we know what we're doing?
Yeah, we are.
No! We don't have a clue what we're doing.
No problem.
But this is the beginning of the greatest movie. This is a movie that's going to be excellently produced. Gloves, an important ingredient. Gloves and shoes. If you don't have gloves, it could be painful. If you don't have shoes, you got no business out here. Huh?
Unbroken hands.
One broken hand, one lame leg. We've got it all, folks.
You get, son.
Huh? Oh, right. That will be interesting. If no go, no go, but if you can, it'll be helpful. Yeah. All right. Superman. Atlas. You notice I saved the beautiful purple ones for myself. Goes with my eyeshadow. Tuck in the boobies. All right. Hang on, I'm gonna get this camera reoriented to watch you guys climb the first hurdle of our...
Go this way.
Yep, your choice is about as good as anybody's. Any way you like.
Okay, go. Keep going.
This is some of the gnarliest terrain on Earth. This is where they test the lunar rovers.